Stutthof concentration camp was one of the most harrowing concentration camps of the Second World War. There were around 110,000 people imprisoned there during World War II, and around 65,000 people died because of the harsh conditions, the slaughter deployed by the SS guards, and a lack of care, food and resources they had. It was one of the roughest camps, and employed inside of this site were many horrific guards, men and women, who instigated a reign of terror onto those who were locked up at the site. There were in total around 295 women guards who worked at Stutthof, and at the end of the Second World War, many of these escaped any form of punishment, and they lived out the rest of their lives in peace when they had beaten, murdered and tortured so many people on a daily basis. Some of these women were brought to trial, and a very select few were sentenced to death and were subjected to a very public execution on a large hill in the city of Gdansk on a specially constructed gallows which were massive. But what happened to the other female guards who worked at Stutthof? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Most of the guards who worked inside of Stutthof concentration camp were German SS guards, but in 1942 the first women Aufseherinnen, or female overseers, arrived at the camp along with the transports of female prisoners. There were many hundreds of women who worked at the camp during the war. These women contributed to the harrowing and barbaric conditions of the camp, and things were very rough and harsh. There were very devastating outbreaks of disease which claimed thousands of lives, and those who were too weak to work were eventually exterminated inside the small gas chamber which was built at Stutthof. These women also regularly selected those prisoners to be sent to their deaths, and many others were killed by lethal injections of phenol to the heart. Prisoners found themselves also killed by guards who even drowned them in the mud in devastating attacks. What we will now do is look at the stories of the female guards, specifically who worked at Stutthof, and what happened to them after World War II. One of the most recognisable female guards was Herta Bothe. She was in her early 20s when she began working at the camp, and was known as the sadist of Stutthof for her evil beatings of inmates. She was also recognisable due to her height, standing at around 6'3" tall, towering over the inmates. Bothe was known for battering prisoners with weapons and anything she could get her hands on. She eventually was sent to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp as Stutthof was being evacuated, but whilst here she was known for using her pistol on prisoners. At her trial she claimed she had never killed anyone, but there was differing evidence brought by the prisoners who saw her crimes. One claimed, "I saw several very weak prisoners carrying a food container from the kitchen block. As it was filled, it was very heavy. The woman could not stand the weight and put it down to rest. At that moment I saw Bothe shoot at the two prisoners with her pistol. They fell down, but I cannot say if they were dead or wounded, but they were very weak, thin and undernourished, and I have no doubt that they died." Herta Bothe was at the end of the Second World War sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, and she served just 6 years before she was released. Years later she did a number of interviews about her actions, and later claimed, "Did I make a mistake? No. The mistake was that it was a concentration camp, but I had to go to it. Otherwise I would have been put into it myself. That was my mistake." Herta Bothe died at the age of 79 in March 2000. Recently, one woman who worked at Stutthof has hit the headlines, as she became the latest person to be brought to trial for her crimes of the Second World War, almost 80 years on. Irmgard Fürstner worked as a secretary at Stutthof and inside the commandant's office, and she was 18 years old when she committed a number of offences. She was charged with at least 10,000 counts of accessory to murder. There was a lot of media coverage of her trial, as she was in her late 90s, being, as of the time of writing, 99 years old. She was at her trial found guilty of being complicit in the murders of over 10,500 people, and was given a suspended 2-year prison sentence. She claimed at the end of the trial that, "I'm sorry for everything that happened. I regret that I was in Stutthof at the time. I can't say anything else. As of writing and recording, she is still alive today." One of the most documented fates of the female guards of Stutthof is what happened to those condemned guards who were executed on a huge set of gallows on Biskupia Gorka Hill on the 4th of July 1946. Jenny Wanda Barkmann, the beautiful Spectre, Elisabeth Becker, Wanda, Ewa Paradies and Gerda Steinhoff were all female guards who had been condemned at trial for their brutality in sending prisoners to the gas chambers, but also in their violent treatment of the inmates on a daily basis. On the day of their executions, they were taken out to the execution site where 20,000 people had gathered, and they were helped towards the gallows. When they reached them, the women were helped onto the back of a truck which was backed under the gallows, and an executioner, who was a former prisoner of Stutthof, secured the noose around the neck of their assigned woman. Following this, and the death sentence being read aloud, the truck then slowly pulled away, and these women were left hanging on the gallows. The former female guards were executed before the men, and it's presumed that following their remains being cut down, they were then either interred in a secret burial plot, cremated, or their bodies could have been donated to medical science and research. Herta Bothe worked at many different concentration camps, including Stutthof, for a brief period. She arrived at the camp in July 1944, before she was reassigned to a different site, Ravensbrück, a camp for all women. Herta Bothe took part in a death march at the end of the war, but in 1948 she was convicted of war crimes for her involvement in the Holocaust and in working at different camps. She was given a prison sentence and she was later released, but in November 1975 she was brought to trial again for her crimes inside this time the Majdanek camp, but was acquitted due to a lack of evidence, and it's presumed that in the years following this she has died, as she would be roughly today 106 years old if she was still alive. One female guard who worked inside of Stutthof for a brief period and was brought to the Stutthof trials was Herta Bothe. She underwent the SS training and was sent to work inside of Stutthof. She previously had medical training and arrived at the camp in August 1944. She was a guard for not very long, as despite being a supervisor of the inmates, she was not known to have beaten or killed prisoners. She found the actions of many of her fellow guards as disturbing and strange, and she did not like this at all. After spending 6 weeks within Stutthof, she decided to resign her position, and she was then involved in evacuating prisoners and performing duties as a nurse, helping care for wounded German soldiers. But she was brought to the Stutthof trials, and she claimed that, "I like the idea of our leader, as in Hitler, that the whole world would apply to us, that we stand victorious over all countries. I have been in the NSDAP since 1933, she said. She also claimed about her time at Stutthof that, "I did not like this work very much, because they tormented people too much, which I couldn't look at." Herta Bothe was given a 5-year prison sentence, as she was a member of the Nazi Party and SS, but was not sentenced for crimes against humanity related to Stutthof because of her admissions in the court and also her resignation. She died in 1999. Another woman who worked at Stutthof was Klein, who was later brought to trial for her crimes. She had been conscripted to work inside of the concentration camps and was sent to the camp following a brief 4-day training period at Ravensbrück in August 1944. She later went on to be sent to Bergen-Belsen with Herta Bothe, where she worked alongside her. She became ill from typhus a number of times at Belsen because the disease was spreading around. At trial, much of her questioning centred around whether she gave out bread or food for the prisoners, or whether they were starved. When asked if she had ever hit any of the prisoners, Klein replied with, "Yes, when they stole bread. They very frequently stole bread, partly from the hand carts, and partly when the door to the bread store was open. When I found anyone trying to steal some bread, I took it away from her and slapped her face. I never used a stick. None of the members of my bread commando ever stole bread, because there was enough in the store, and if they wanted, they could eat as much as they liked." Prisoners accused her of beating inmates until they died, but at the Belsen trials, Klein was acquitted of any charge due to a lack of evidence. There were many other women whose names are known who worked at the camp, such as Ella Blank, Ella Bergman and Gerda Bothe, of which little information is out there about their fate after the end of the Second World War. In total, there were 34 women who were identified as having committed crimes against humanity, either in Stutthof and then in other camps too. The women in the local area of Danzig or Gdansk were conscripted to work at the camp due to a severe lack of guards to staff it. Other women such as Charlotte Graf, Charlotte Gregor and Steffi Brilowski have also disappeared from the history books and the records. These women were known for their brutality, and the crimes they committed inside of Stutthof were endless. Very few, roughly 10 to 15% of the women who worked at the camp, were ever brought to trial for their actions, and most at the end of the war evaded capture, and they were then free to live out the rest of their lives however they wanted. But they must have been at some time looking over their shoulders, as still very recently, a former female worker of Stutthof has been sentenced for her crimes within the barbed wire fences of that camp 80 years ago. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.